You've heard AM, you've heard FM. Now, tune into DM Radio, the world's longest running show about data. Each week, host Eric Kavanaugh interviews the brightest minds in the world of information management. Want to be on a show? Send an email to info@dmradio.biz. Now, here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again to the longest running show in the world about data. It's called DM Radio. Yours truly, Eric Kavanaugh here. And we're going to talk data platforms today, customer data platforms in particular, CDPs as they're called. We'll figure out what a CDP is compared to, for example, a data warehouse or a data lake. The hot new topic, of course, lake house architectures. We're getting very sophisticated in some of these environments. We're going to talk about what that all means and what you can expect to get from a customer data platform, where they come in handy, how they help you navigate through difficult times, how they help you understand what your customers want, what your prospects want. These are fairly complex issues, and really it all gets down to profiles, building profiles around individuals, and then being able to classify and sort and organize and kind of figure out how to treat this group versus that group. It's all driven by analytics. It's all driven by data, of course, and increasingly AI. And we've got two experts for us to talk about that today. We've got Drew Lanenga from Lytics and Zack Wenthe from Treasure Data. I love that name, by the way, Zack. Treasure Data. Come on, like whoever came up with that deserves a raise immediately. But just real quick, let's get an intro from each of you. I'll throw it over to Zack first, I guess. Tell us a bit about yourself and what you're doing in the space of customer data platforms.
Sure. So Zack Wenthe from Treasure Data. I'm the customer data evangelist. So I get the fun job of coming out and doing shows like this. I tend to spend most of my time traveling around the country, speaking at conferences, working with the analysts, and really just kind of talking about the opportunity and the potential with customer data and helping kind of people navigate it. Spent most of my career in MarTech, so this is just kind of a natural extension of my career to date. So.
I love it. And a quick opening statement from Drew Lanenga from Lytics. Tell us about yourself and what you're doing in the field of CDPs.
Yeah, Drew Lanenga, CTO at Lytics. I've been with the company since its inception in 2013 and have taken on different roles as a chief data scientist for a while, which is a job which is as fun as it sounds. Intelligence is pretty core inside of the world of profiles, and making sure that these profiles are as rich as possible, that you've got accuracy, you've got lots of other concerns that you look to a CDP for, that been helping to build for about a decade.
That's very, very cool. Well, let's go back over to Zack and Treasure Data. Of course, you've got some big accounts. I think it was some activity with Yum Brands that brought us together here for the show today. And you mentioned something interesting in the pre-call about how you've got these different brands. You don't want to have them competing with each other. That's a pretty interesting use case to solve with a customer data platform. Can you kind of walk us through what you were talking about there and why it's important and what you're able to do to help them?
Yeah, absolutely. So, brands like Yum, and if you're not familiar with Yum Brands, they are the parent company for brands like Taco Bell, KFC, Pizza Hut, and a few others. And any of those multi-brand companies, a lot of times, there's a lot of synergy from an operational perspective, and there's a lot of synergy from a, cost sharing perspective. But there's a challenge when you start to think about the customer base, because in, quick service restaurants, they're all kind of competing for similar dollars or similar, buying behaviors from their customers. So you don't want to kind of cannibalize your own market by saying, okay, well, Friday night is historically people went to Pizza Hut and, got pizza night on Friday night. Like, if we're running a bunch of Taco Bell promotions, we may be pulling our own dollars away from ourselves. And so you're kind of stealing from your own basket, if you will. So giving the brands those understandings of kind of that customer, not just within their kind of, brand vertical, but across their entire portfolio, across the country, across geos, understanding the different kind of, buying patterns, really allows them to not only personalize at the brand level, but then again, at that portfolio level, and put their impact where, Tuesday night, they're not buying from either of our brands. That's when we need to be pushing, customer A and really focusing on promotions for them. So getting smarter, saving money. It's all super important.
Well, that's very cool stuff because you're talking about optimizing spend, and optimizing marketing spend is always important. Being able to track what you get from these things, and really being able to track not just the vanity metrics, which are plentiful in the internet world, but actual revenue, and understand, being able to tie ad campaigns to revenue at certain brands, and to identify patterns of behavior. Like you said, Pizza Hut Friday night, that's what people do. You want to understand that as a consumer of analytics, as a consumer of these technologies, because that's what you're looking for. You're looking for that exact kind of pattern, where something that is strong and stable, okay, let's nurture that. Let's not cannibalize that, and then look at the other opportunities. Because think of it, I mean, it's embarrassing how many opportunities there are to use different tools and platforms and channels. I mean, it's just all over the map. And I guess that's an interesting question for you too. How do you help your customers figure out where to spend their time and energy, and which channels to explore, all that kind of fun stuff?
Yeah, so I think that's one of the biggest promises that a CDP kind of offers is that idea of almost allowing them to be a little more channel agnostic, rather than saying, well, we have all these profiles in email. We don't really know anything about our social people, so we'll just kind of stick to email. By bringing everything together, loyalty platform, transactional, e-commerce, you name it, wherever you're storing that profile data, allows you to truly build that like defragmented version of a profile. And now you can use that to be smarter and say, okay, well, now I'm going to go do paid. I'm going to go do lookalike audience, and target people to build higher value spend. Or I'm going to use it to say, here's my highest value customers. I'm going to use that and send that to Facebook to build my seed audience for my lookalike. So not just people who've bought from me, but who are actually high value customers. Build even better lookalike audiences. Gives you that ability to kind of move across channels without being kind of locked into those often walled gardens that are they want to sell you data, obviously. But if you come with your own, you take away some of that black box.
Yeah, that's interesting. And let's, I'll throw one more question at you, and then we'll jump over to Drew. But first party data, we keep hearing about Google ending third party cookies. As far as I know, it's still been pushed out and has not been enacted. But assuming it does get enacted, it's almost like pulling the rug out from under everyone in terms of how they've been doing things. So I see a lot of attention these days on first party data to understand your customer, to understand what a signal looks like. And then you can go shopping for other data sets external to kind of map that against what you see. But that first party data is really important. And if you're a big company like Yum Brands, you got lots and lots of first party data to work with, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and you have a lot of first party data that potentially isn't being utilized to its best advantage, right? So if you have somebody coming in through a drive-through and swiping their credit card, if they don't have a loyalty program or they're not using a loyalty number, that may be historically a lost transaction. But being able to map that back based on the merchant token from the credit card, or if you have a loyalty with some basic information in it, you can tie it to maybe the Pizza Hut information. So there's a lot of different ways. And it's not just Yum who's doing that. I mean, we have customers all over the board kind of looking at those scenarios around how do we build, better profiles, richer profiles. CPG companies are investing heavily in this because, in the past, it was always, we would do it through promotion and through, store presence. Well, the pandemic woke up a lot of people and said, okay, store presence doesn't work. We have to at least have a relationship to influence them. Even if we don't own that end transaction, we need the ability to have that influence on that buying pattern. So first party still going. According to Google, I think, early 2024, we're going to see 1% of Chrome start to eliminate cookies as the first test pattern. So it's right around the corner.
Wow.
And it will be a challenge for a lot of people.
Yeah, that's a big deal. Let's throw it over to Drew from Lytics. I thought what Zack said there a moment ago about being channel agnostic, that's very interesting, because I look at the array of channels and I understand how you can pull signal from these places. It is absolutely true that some people will respond faster on LinkedIn to a direct message than they will to an email, for example. Some people like direct messages in other platforms, for example. Some people still like email. A lot of people, are shifting to do more social. how do you tackle that from a CDP perspective? How big a deal is that for you and for Lytics? And what's some insight you can give us in terms of how to leverage channel awareness, basically, Drew?
Yeah, I mean that channel awareness is key. You're mentioning user preferences, and that there's room for expression within a user profile, within a customer, to have preferences across channels. And then on the other side, at the organizational level, everybody's got different data sources. Even within the CPG space, loyalty might be stronger in others and less in a different organization. And so making sure that the customer profiles that you have within a customer data platform reflect the activity of the user in their own channel is super important. So a lot of the things that we do, we have out of the box scoring algorithms that look at channel preferences, that score channel preferences, that reflect when we're thinking about decisioning and what's the next best offer for a customer.
Right.
It reflects a lot of those underlying preferences. So making sure that is agnostic, that your machine learning is agnostic, your algorithms are agnostic, lets you then activate pretty agnostically.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. And as I think about the ability these days, thanks to machine learning, but also just thanks to a lot of learning in how to manage federated systems and how to manage scale out systems. These days, in the old days, you would have to ask someone, do you prefer email, phone, et cetera? And then, of course, they don't always tell the truth, right? They say one thing, maybe the reality is something different. But these days, you really can capture that much information and determine signal dynamically, and that's really what you want to do, right? You want to look
Exactly.
at the interactivity of your profiles and be able to cost effectively manage that and leverage that and say, hey, this person hasn't opened any email in 6 months. Stop emailing them, send them a direct message through this platform,
Totally.
right? It's little things like that, and I think the good CDPs are finding that signal or helping you find that signal and then helping you act on the signal, right, Drew?
Right. Yeah, exactly. So you're not going to be able to personalize in a meaningful way when you're overweighting, when you've got kind of disproportionate or channel preferences, in your tools. A lot of CDPs have come to this CDP destination from different places. Some companies start out as CDPs, some ESPs. They're doing email and they say, hey, if we add a little bit of data on this profile, we can be a customer data platform too, or tag managers or whatever, right? So
Right.
When you're coming from a place of this email centric behavior, you've got to really fight that tendency to overweight, email and delivery and optimization and all those kinds of CP use cases.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting stuff. I still do believe email is king, at least for our world. Maybe I'll throw it over to Zack to comment on. Consumer is very different from B2B too, right? I mean,
Yep.
Consumer, you have a lot more people, you have a lot of different variety of kinds of people out there and different needs, different drivers, business drivers, whereas B2B, it's a bit more focused. So you can do maybe some greater depth on individual channels or things of that nature. Can you speak to that for a minute? How to know where to invest your time and effort using these technologies to get the value? What do you think, Zack?
Yeah, I mean, obviously within, they both have their own challenges, right? So in the consumer space, you have scale, just the sheer number of volume of consumer profiles, householding and managing how. My wife and I are a great example. A lot of times I'll start a purchase, she'll finish the purchase. How do we that customer journey or vice versa? Then on the B2B side, yeah, you have, maybe a primary channel of email, some LinkedIn, some, there's less channels typically, YouTube, whatnot. But the problem is you tend to have more buyers involved. So in typical, if anybody's been through a B2B buying cycle, either on the selling side or on the buying side, there's always a committee, known and unknown. And so, then it's a matter of managing not just the account and what does that account do and how do they do, what are the 6 to 12 people who are involved in there? Some are reading content, some are engaging, some are, in your CRM, many are not. And then what happens if you're, like us or others, a SaaS provider potentially who now you roll it out? Well, none of these people are in my CRM, but now they're all become users of our platform, right? They're logging in and they're creating profiles. And so you're creating more and more of those silos. And so again, just being able to tie all that information back to, as Drew said, that central profile. It doesn't matter where it's from. Data is data at that point. It's just a matter of wrapping the business rules around it that are necessary for the type of business you're doing.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And Drew, I'll throw this one over to you as you're a data science expert in machine learning. Finding cohorts is a big part of what you're trying to do in that world, which is basically classification, right? Who should be grouped together versus who should not be grouped together. And it seems to me there's just so much opportunity. I mean, there's so many ways that you could be scanning for that and looking for inference. What are some tips you can give for how to kind of expedite that, or how to tease the system to give you what you want?
Yeah, I mean, customer segmentation is hard, mainly because finding the right segmentation is hard. You can, if you have the rules, if you have the right rules, it's easy to do, right? But knowing what the right rules are, knowing who to target and how to target them can be difficult. And a lot of kind of historic marketing and business efforts have been around demographics. And you say, demographics is the best I can do, and I'm going to target this demographic differently than this demographic because I have an assumption of how they're going to use that data. Where you fast forward to today, one, you don't have to do that in the first place, and two, you start running the risk of really diminishing opportunities where, to Zach's point, maybe Zach's buying a gift for himself, and maybe he's buying a gift for his wife. Maybe he's interested in a gift that doesn't match his demographic profile, but based off of his interests, we know that he's in the market for a particular set of products or whatever. So making sure that you don't put your thumb on the scale too much as a practitioner to say, I have these assumptions and I'm going to validate them with this experiment, and maybe you can get some mileage out of that, but you're going to get a lot more mileage when you let the data speak for itself, and when you kind of, to your point, let the cohorts kind of emerge and really cater to those.
Yeah, and this is where I think these new foundational models are going to come in remarkably handy at finding different kinds of signal, being able to classify more dynamically at a much greater scale. For example, I see a tremendous amount of potential in terms of optimizing what you do, how you go about the process of classification. And, gosh, the workflows are, well, what did my buddy say? Everything's a pipeline these days, right? Like even when I was talking to the guy from Discover Financial Services last week, they took their whole CI/CD pipeline, and then at the very end, you can choose to deploy to the traditional environment or to a Kubernetes environment. So they have consistency throughout that process, because this is a financial services firm. They have a lot of data, a lot of regulation, a lot of compliance issues to worry about, and money, staying on top of the money and who's spending it and who they should be marketing to. So it's just amazing how much value you can get, but it does take some time. You got to roll up your sleeves. But don't touch that dial, folks. Be right back. You are listening to DM Radio.
Welcome back to DM Radio. Here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
All right, folks, back here on DM Radio, talking all about customer data platforms. And is the future of CDPs composable? We'll talk about composability here in a minute. That's as opposed to the monolithic architecture that we've seen over the years, which really was the last whole generation of enterprise software. It was a monolith. It was like big ERP systems, even big CDPs were sort of monolithic. And composability refers to being able to take bits and pieces and kind of roll your own and weave it all together. Of course, there's a lot of that going on out there as well. But right before the last segment ended, I think we were talking to Zack, or maybe it was in the break. You made a really good point, Zack, about the scientific method and how when you're testing out different theories, you want to be doing so explicitly, like say, okay, I have a theory that X is going to happen if I do Y. Now let's push some code out. Let's push out some ideas, some programs, and see what happens. And you have to be realistic about assessing whether or not you succeeded, right, Zack?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, with all these channels and all these opportunities and all the potential, I think marketers can get hung up on, they're biased or the way things have worked in the past. And so one of the best ways and the opportunities with CDP and with just data in general now is to really, adopt that scientific method. Have some curiosity. I think, as you mentioned, go into it with a point of view or perspective saying, this is what I think is going to happen. And then you run a test and you see what the data tells you. And now you can adjust or iterate, whether that's through a rules-based approach or through, machine learning, building models, building programs, whatever that is. It's a constant iteration. And so I think marketers and data managers and campaign managers and, anybody now have to approach this much more with a scientific lens of test, iterate, learn, fail, improve, rapidly. But doing that with, as opposed to kind of the way we've always done it, or follow the playbook. And now we have data to back it up, and we can actually run these campaigns and say, oh, this worked, this didn't, I can prove it.
Right. Isn't that nice?
Yes.
I'll throw it over to Drew, because what was the old joke? The guy Wanamaker, I think, said, I know that half of my advertising works. The trouble is I don't know which half. And that's the old way, right? I mean, that's kind of the world we lived in. You had to I remember you would do surveys and things. Good luck with that one, buddy. It's just very difficult. And now, that's kind of you mostly know. There's still a lot of gray area. I get very upset about the vanity metrics I see from these social media companies. Like, you throw $5 at them and I got 50,000 views. Like, okay, well, what, who are these people that are viewing when I give my $5 in? There's something to be said for that. But that is a wonderful new development, or relatively new, Drew, that we can go out, test the hypothesis, and then show the data and say, well, I know it worked because the open rate went up 20% and they bought 10% more. What do you think?
Exactly. Yeah. Hypothesis testing is really important, as opposed to hypothesis codification. Right? If you've got hypotheses that you're baking into how you're doing things, you're going to find that, what you're, even on social, right? The things you're doing on TikTok are going to be very different than the things you're doing on Twitter. Right. So when you come to these platforms with these assumptions, if you're willing to test them, if you're willing to put that kind of on the line and let the data speak, you're going to hear what it says.
Yeah, that's got to be the most interesting part for you and your team, I'm guessing, Drew, is being able to just sit there and dig into the data and see what it tells you. And these new technologies are just really, the LLMs, everyone's wrapping their head around that stuff, what it's going to do, how, we had a guy in a couple of weeks ago that talked about a very clever strategy of training the models. He says you can either embed your corporate data into the model, which is difficult and time consuming and probably a bit brittle, or you can use a vector database and persist your corporate data in there. And it's like an anchor of truth. I love that term he used. This is Brian Raymond from unstructured.io. Anchor of truth. That's your first party data, right? And so that's what's going to kind of hold in the LLM from hallucinating too much and still give you something that's close. It's like a mooring, essentially. What do you think? Exactly.
Yeah. What's interesting there is that pretty early on in the LLM lifecycle, everybody's trying to fine tune models and make sure that it reflected, what they wanted it to do. But they found pretty quickly that no, it's actually all in the prompt. And so as you're saying, you plug this into like a vector database, and you have that crafting and refining the prompts that you're building. If you ask for something from one of these models, you're going to get it, right? So you have to be asking the right thing. And so in data platforms, you can be asking a lot of pretty interesting questions, and they can be, data oriented, and they can be, how can I make this schema better? How do I optimize this merge strategy or whatever? Or, here's a customer of mine. And what's the right email subject line or whatever kinds of end user optimization you might be doing, but the prompt is going to get you there, whichever kind of direction you take it.
Yeah, A/B testing, lots of A/B testing. I'll throw that over to Zack, I guess. You always want to be doing some kind of testing, right? Just figuring out which direction things are going. To me, it's kind of it's exciting, but it's also a bit frustrating to see behavioral changes. And I'm starting to see them around, email. First of all, it's getting harder to do email marketing because there's so much noise out there. But second of all, just knowing even just how often to hit people and with what offers. These are basic questions, but they're very important questions that will have a dramatic impact on open rates, on click-throughs, on unsubscribes, all that stuff, right? And kind of knowing how do you figure out the sort of range of play that you have within an organization from your experience? What's some advice you can give on how to kind of understand what's reasonable and what's not? I'll throw that to Zack.
Yeah. So I think, the range of play comes down to understanding, first, you have an objective as a corporate entity. You want to sell something. But I think we had this period of time where email, because it was quote unquote free to send, even though it was, cost you to maintain the systems, it was free to send. People developed this more is more strategy where it's like, well, okay, if one email doesn't work, 10 probably will, and inevitably what happened was people got bored, they got tired of it, they unsubscribed, like you said, they leave. But it was an acceptable enough level of churn because either you had a pretty, good lock on your market, or you had enough growth and whatnot. Really, the last 3-5 years, I mean, the pandemic was probably the biggest driver of this, but people have figured out it's very easy to leave a brand, because brands ran out of, supply chain. They had supply chain problems, and all of a sudden, people are like, oh, I can find an alternative. I can get something else. Or people who were still scared of shopping online during the pandemic figured out how to shop online. And so we've entered this kind of consumer driven economy or consumer driven mode now where really it's not the brand dictating the behavior, it's the consumers. And so the brands that are winning, the brands that are doing this really well are then going back and saying, what are my consumers saying, right? Either explicitly saying or saying through the data, right? They're not they open an email once a quarter. Don't send them an email every other day, because all that's going to do is create friction and burnout. And so using those data, building, preference profiles, whether they're explicitly where somebody's coming in saying, this is my preference, or the implied models, either through modeling or through next best actions, looking at the channel preferences, really saying, how do we model our data and our responses? And the coolest opportunity, I think, where to tie it back to LLMs, is personalization has never been a technical problem, really. Like, we've had the means of personalizing email, personalizing ad campaigns, personalizing websites for so long. It's been a people problem. It's been creating the rules and creating enough personalized content so that you can really get down to that level of granularity where you have that big impact. So LLMs now can start to create all of that content for you. You can have images and text and whatnot, or at least the first draft, right? Today. Right. So now we can really start to play with personalization a lot differently and give people exactly what they're looking for in wording and subject lines and all of that, so that it truly drives results with less noise, less frequency, less often, but higher impact, higher emotional connections, all of those things that marketers are trying to do.
Yeah, that's great stuff. And, Drew, I'll throw this one over to you. The other really nice thing about being in this space today is that, again, we have the capacity to do this tremendous analytical functionality on our data, and not just structured data, not just numbers, but text, right? And text analytics. So now you really can get voice of the customer. Look at what are the people saying about us online? What are they saying through our channels? Do these things line up? I have to think there's a fair amount of activity in that space too, just finding the key topics that you want to use, the key messaging you want to use, then being able to test that over time, right?
Yeah, and I think you're starting to get into pretty interesting territory there, where what you're doing is allowing the customer to have a lot more voice in the experiences that they have with your brand. Right. That's really what first party data is doing, right? What we're saying is, here's all the information about this individual that's necessary to contextualize, to personalize, to delight, and you've got to be listening. And if you're listening, then there's a lot of interesting things to hear that you don't have to supplement with third-party data sources and kind of pursue those avenues, because in reality they're gone soon anyway.
That's funny. Yeah, they're gone soon. Voice of the customer is something we've had. It's been a term, it's been an expression for a long time, but I'll throw it back over to you, Zach. We've got a couple minutes left in this segment. We really can hear the voice of the customer now, and you can hear it at scale. You can catalog it, you can track it over time. You can kind of see where attitudes shift and when they shift. I mean, there are some, pretty big examples in the recent past of companies kind of going overboard on certain messages and getting a backlash. But it's very exciting because you really can hear the voice of the customer now. What do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, from the first wave of kind of social listening, looking at sentiment analysis and all of those things at you just even at an aggregate level is amazing. I did a presentation years ago when I was in the consulting world, and it was a fast food. Stuck on fast food today, but it was a place where people had birthday parties, kids had birthday parties. And I pulled up all of these moms who had a complaint on Twitter about either having trouble booking or having issues getting a reservation for a birthday party. And I'm sitting in front of the CMO with like this list of like 20 posts. He stops the meeting and he sends somebody out of the room to like follow up on every single one of those. He's like, that's lost revenue right there. Like just, wow. And so, and that's easy. It's 15, 20, 30 posts that are, hundreds of dollars in revenue for them. So, right. There's all of these potentials. I think the reality is now we're in a world where businesses are going to have to prioritize. What is the objective that we're trying to solve for immediately? And then really define what's that model, what's that analytics, what's that tool set? Because there's so many choices, it's very easy to get caught up in the shiny object syndrome where OpenAI and LLM models and all that is amazing. But if it doesn't fit your business case right now, like chasing it and having a whole skunkworks team is just a distraction. So understanding, for most brands, I'm a big believer that first mover in LLMs and those in generative AI in general is probably not the right play. Fast follow is probably the smarter choice, right? Let some other people go. If it's not a differentiator for your business, like a truly revenue driving differentiator, then it's probably better to kind of wait it out a little bit because the opportunities aren't going away. We're just going to get smarter about how we use them.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. Like fast follower as opposed to a first mover. What was the old expression? You can always tell the pioneers by the arrowheads in their backs. It's not the place you want to be. You don't want to be dying on that hill. And you do have to understand what is the purpose of this thing that we have here, right? Yep. When you look at the LLMs, I had Naveen Rao on the show a couple of weeks ago. Of course, the CEO of Mosaic ML, right, just got bought by Databricks for $1.3 billion. And he said very candidly, yes, marketing communications, proposals, basic text-based constructs that we have long struggled with. And let's face it, a lot of people do struggle to write stuff. So for that, 80% of the world, basically, these LLMs are incredibly powerful for just giving you a starting point, and then you can kind of fine tune it and update it to get what you want. But it's like it turns every writer into a 10x writer. And I think that's a big deal. Drew, real quick, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's the augmentation that it does, and the groundwork that it's exactly, and we sometimes we get attached to the legwork, and we get attached to configuration, we get attached to these opinions that we have that in reality we'd all rather be focusing on other things.
Yeah. Well, and that's the key, right? In general, AI and machine learning are tackling tasks that the human being is just not going to be capable of tackling. And, one of the other guys we've interviewed, he's the one who turned me on to the use case of feeding documents into these engines and asking for summaries. I mean, it's basically like a dynamic Cliff's Notes engine. Like you take War and Peace, give me a 5-page summary of who the main characters are so I can go study for my exam and then just walk in there. I actually had someone as to college a long time ago, but man, I would always push it at the end of the semester, work really, really hard, get those grades back up before you have to go home, et cetera. And someone handed me like a plot outline of, I don't know what it was, like that wasn't War and Peace, but something like 400-page book. I was like, oh, yes. And I scored and I nailed it. And I did not read the whole book. I'm not going to lie. Dr. Nolan would not be too pleased, but she's a good lady. Anyway, don't touch that. We'll be right back. You are listening to DM Radio.
Welcome back to DM Radio. Here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
All right, folks, back here on DM Radio, talking all things customer data platforms. And we've got two great guests here today, Drew Lanenga from Lytics and Zack Wenthe from Treasure Data. I love that name, Treasure Data. It's got to be good stuff, man. Who doesn't love treasure? Pirate treasure? Come on. But
Right.
anyway, Drew, in the break, you made a really good point about the importance of trust, and you referred to as trust being a currency that no brand can afford to lose. And your CDP really should be a cornerstone of your interaction with your customers, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what we're seeing today is that consumers have more choice, more alternative than they've ever had before. And Zack pointed that out with some of the COVID points. And just when you have a relationship with the brand and you realize that relationship is one-sided, you can take that elsewhere. So making sure that trust is inherently reflected in the experiences with your customers, that the way that you're collecting their data makes sense. A lot of times either a lot of third-party stuff or a lot of kind of like inferred attributes about somebody are either garbage or they're creepy. And if they're garbage, they're not helping you, and if they're creepy, that's again like kind of a risk of this trust currency that you really can't afford to waste.
Yeah, it's really important, and that all sort of spins out of culture as well. And maybe I'll throw that over to Zack. A good corporate culture is hard to foster, and it can be difficult to maintain. But when you've got a good culture, really good things happen. If you have a bad culture, bad things are going to happen. I mean, I've often wondered about that, and I think you could probably get some good insights from your customer data platform to kind of understand, all right, who are we catering to and how should our culture reflect that? I mean, that's getting a bit strategic, but I don't know. What do you think?
Well, no, I mean, I have an example exactly of that situation. We have a company that's direct to consumer, they do healthy food, and, they had a kind of a profile of like, this is what our ideal customer is. This is who we're going after. If you looked at all their advertising and all their strategy and everything was kind of tied to this picture of a, athlete or runner, somebody who's doing marathons and, just the healthy, active person. And, they were going through a Series B with an investor, and the investor kind of said, well, okay, let's break this down though and actually look at it by like transaction volume and like who is your customer. And so they took all this first party data they had, and they took a bunch of zero party data, so surveys that people had completed and said, I'm training for this purpose, or I'm eating for this purpose, and then they wrapped it with some demographics and some psychographic information. What they found out was actually kind of shocking to all of them. Their number one highest revenue producer was a active parent, somebody who's either an recent empty nester or has like, high school kids in sports and whatnot. They're on the go a lot. They're generally just cooking for them and, a spouse or them by themselves. And they just want to eat healthy. They don't want fast food. They don't want takeout. They want something that convenient, which is almost a complete 180 from, that picture of the marathon, triathlete. And so really thinking through like, how do we change our messaging, change our strategy, change all of that was eye-opening for them. And this was, obviously a big part of why they wanted a CDP, because they were making those guesses before. And so It got all the team talking and really got them to buy into this idea of knowing our customers is the only way that's our differentiator. That's our way of winning in this, in a very crowded market and space.
Yeah, and that's a good point to bring up, just how crowded the environment is these days. Like for anything that gets hot, it's so much easier to launch a new enterprise than it was 20 years ago. So that's part of the magic. And then just knowing which direction you're going to go. Kind of the one really interesting thing about these large language models to me is that you really are looking at a reflection of our culture of the last like 10, 15 years, right? That's the corpus upon which the models were built and designed, and that's what it's reflecting back to you. So if you do some research, and these LLMs are great for research too, even though ChatGPT, I guess, is from like 2021 and before or something like that. But Bard, I understand, is already doing call outs to the internet and different things. So they're evolving very, very quickly. But I'll throw it over to Drew. You can learn a lot by playing around with these things and just asking questions about your brand just to see what it tells you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have to be careful what you ask for, because you're going to get the answer,
Right.
exactly the way you ask it, but making sure that you're inquisitive in that you're also guiding that response to outcomes you care about. Like you're going to get the answer.
Yeah, you're going to get a lot of answers, and they may not be the answers that you want, but you want the truth. I mean, you told a story, Zack, a minute ago, and I actually saw the story. I won't say the name of the vendor. It was a huge enterprise software vendor. I was at their event a few years ago, and I just, for kicks, went onto Facebook to their page on Facebook, and it was just flaming hot with complaints. like 20 of them in a row. They're like, no one's calling us. The stuff isn't working. We can't get it stood up. I'm like, guys, are you? And there's all this push to go social. I'm like, do you have anyone like manning the social site? Is there anyone reading this stuff? So it's like you get all these insights. If you don't listen to them, you're in trouble, right? Zack, you've got to pay attention to what people are saying. That's voice to the customer, voice to the partner, or whatever. It's crucially important, right, Zack?
Yeah, you have to bring people together, because the customer is important to the entire enterprise. Like, otherwise, why would you have a business, right? I mean, at the end of the day, we have to remember that even if you don't directly, operate with, in front of a customer, obviously that is the reason you are there. In most cases, obviously nonprofits and enterprises function differently, but generally speaking, the people we're dealing with, customer data platforms, are very concerned about that. The funniest thing I find is a lot of times how often when we do kickoffs and we do meetings, a lot of these departments meet for the first time. So not only was their data siloed, but a lot of their organization was by either geography or distance or just because they're so busy with doing so many other things that just the opportunity didn't arise for them to meet. And they're meeting in these meetings for the first time. And I think one of the biggest things that I always preach is having a center of excellence, not just to manage the data, but so that you guys are talking about what's important to you and why are we collecting this information? What are we going to use it for? Yeah. So that there's a team of people with a bunch of different backgrounds and a bunch of different perspectives all working together. That's how you get that company culture. That's how you get that customer first mentality, because you're all kind of now waking up and having somebody challenge your thoughts, which is a good thing.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Actually, I'll throw it over to Drew maybe to comment on. But you want to be bringing people together and going over the data, going over what you're seeing from the CDP. What is the signal we're getting these days? Get every department at some point, the finance people, the marketing people, the sales people. There are some remarkable disconnects where there should not be. I mean, there's always tension between sales and marketing, but really you want those people to be as tight as possible. And it's important just to have the conversations, just to work that into your business management scenario. Yeah. And that's up to management to do, right? Drew, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're talking about customer data platforms and we're talking about customer profiles, and really those customer profiles represent relationships with the brand, right? Zack's Pizza Hut profile, for example, doesn't represent everything about Zack. I'm sure he's got interests outside of Pizza Hut. But for Pizza Hut, that represents their relationship together, the trust that they've built, the experiences that they have. And to the extent that you start seeing your organizational footprint in a profile, you're starting to go in the wrong direction. You shouldn't see discrepancy in data sources or in organizational or teams or ownership or the metrics that you're tracking on a profile, because this team's KPIs are slightly different than this team's KPIs. When you start getting into that territory, again, you're slightly at risk of breaching some of that trust. But at the end of the day, that profile isn't representing the relationship that you think it is.
Yeah. Well, and you have to know where the disconnects are and know where your own personal biases are, quite frankly. Just ask ChatGPT to do a profile on you and see what it says. The first time actually someone did that, it was very accurate. The second time, it was not. This is one of the problems that these large language models have. They have short-term memory issues. They have long-term memory issues, right? They're designed to fuse vectors of information. That's the whole purpose of the engine, is to fuse these different vectors of information to create something new, to generate new content. Well, folks, look both of these gentlemen up online on LinkedIn. They're out there, and check out these companies doing very, very cool stuff. We'll be talking to Zack Wenthe, that's Wnthe, of Treasure Data, and of course, Drew Lanenga from Lytics. We're booking out the rest of the year right now, so send me an email, info@dmradio.biz. I want to know what you want to know. We do have a podcast bonus segment coming up next. We'll talk maybe a bit about curiosity and what to look for employees, right? It's a very dynamic environment now. We've had massive layoffs in the tech space. Lots of people are looking for new jobs. You can train yourself these days. You can learn all kinds of stuff. And don't forget, LLMs can also write code. I love that. They don't just write language. They can write code in Java and COBOL and whatever you want. You are listening to DM Radio.